I graduated from Howard University, undergrad as well as Howard Law School. And I served as an Assistant Attorney General for 19 years with the DC Office of the Attorney General. And I took a brief respite and went to the Office of Tax and Revenue, whom I represented as an attorney, and worked there for almost 2 years as Chief of the Assessment Services Division. I then returned to the Office of the Attorney General and worked there until 2006. And my last several years at the Office of the Attorney General, I actually represented DCRA, which is how I got to know the agency, and which is why the former director asked me to come over as the deputy. So I did a lot of litigation, various kinds of litigation. I started with tax litigation, I did civil litigation, I did some criminal prosecutions. So I've seen the government from a wide spectrum, and I kind of know how it works. You know, you look at it as a wheel, and there are various spokes in the wheel that keep it together. In fact, DCRA is considered by many as the nucleus of all agencies because it all starts with DCRA. Our mission is to protect the health, safety, economic interests, and quality of life of all district residents, visitors, and businesses. How do we do that? If you want to build a building, you have to get a building permit from DCRA. Once that building, during the various phases of construction, it must be inspected. For example, if you're building from the ground up, once you lay the foundation, there's a foundation inspection. And once you put up the framing, there's a framing inspection. Once you put in the electrical wires, there's an electrical inspection. Once you put in the plumbing, there's a plumbing inspection, so forth and so on. And once the building is completed, there's a final inspection to make sure the building meets all codes. Also part of that process is zoning. There are basically residential zones, commercial zones, and manufacturing zones in the District of Columbia. And that's all done by the Zoning Commission. We merely enforce the zoning code. So if you want to build something, it must be, your intended use must meet the zoning codes. If you want to put in, let's say, dry cleaners, it can't be in a strictly residential zone. It has to be in either mixed use or commercial zone. So when you submit your building plans, our zoning division will look at your plans to make sure it's in the proper zone. So if you, and then the zoning is divided, for example, residential is divided into 5 different categories. Residential 1 means that you can only have single-family dwellings that can't be attached. And then there's some yard requirements. The yard has to be a certain dimension and so forth. That's R1. R2 allows for residences that are what we consider townhouses or row houses. They can be connected together. And I'm not going to get into all the aspects of it, but they're basically 5 R zones, R1 through R5. R1 is the most restrictive. It has to be single-family dwellings, can't be attached. R5 is the least restrictive, and it's basically mixed use, where you might have houses, you might have small businesses, barbershops, small restaurants, and so forth. And then we get into our commercial zones where you can have, even those are divided into, you know, large commercial, small commercial. And then we have manufacturing districts where you can do manufacturing, light manufacturing, and large manufacturing, which we have little of in the District of Columbia. We don't have a lot of manufacturing in the district. But to put it in perspective, you probably heard recently about the medical marijuana dispensaries and cultivation centers. And we made our zoning administrator made the decision that the cultivation centers were more like light manufacturing because they required a lot of watering, planting, a lot of electricity. And the law says it couldn't be located in a residential zone. So that precluded all R zone, R1 through R5. You couldn't put them in an R zone, no residential. So it had to be, we just determined that it had to be light manufacturing, commercial light manufacturing. Now, unfortunately, the most zones that fit that description are in Ward 5. So you probably didn't read an article in a small publication called The Heartbeat in Brooklyn, which said that DCRA steered all of the cultivation centers to Ward 5, which is totally not true. It just so happens Ward 5 was, when the zoning commission, zoned the district, they looked at Ward 5, and I remember an uncle of mine, and this is a long time ago, who used to live here. He worked at New York Avenue and Florida Avenue because it was a major gateway for trucks that came in. If you're familiar with that area, there's a bridge that comes down New York and goes into Florida. And there were a lot of warehouses on either side because that's where the big trucks came into the city. And so they used that area for commercial. And that's Ward 5. Of course, during the course of the years, people started moving into those areas, and now you have more residences probably than the zoning commission envisioned, but you still have the zone as commercial, manufacturing, and residential. So unfortunately, in fact, the mayor read that 5 of the awards were in Ward 5, because that's where the zones are. So zoning is important, but we have no control over zoning. We merely enforce the zoning laws. People come and say, well, can't you make an exception? It's just going to be a little draconian. Even though it's in a residential area and the zoning doesn't allow it, can't you make an exception? Well, we can't do that. That's not we have no authority to change the law. We merely have the authority to enforce the law. And people ask us for variances all the time, and we have no authority to do that. So DCRA is also misunderstood in terms of the fact that we do only have enforcement authority rather than the authority to grant variances. We also license all businesses. Every business in the District of Columbia has to get a business license from DCRA. And I think last year we issued about 20,000 business licenses. And also, for perspective, last year we issued about 40,000 building permits throughout the city. And if you know anything about the city, we probably have more development and construction going on now than we've ever had probably in the history of the District of Columbia. In fact, I remember 4 years ago, we looked out the window of our office on the 9th floor at 941 on Capitol. We could see a panoramic view of most of the city. And we thought it was a lot to have 7 cranes. There were 7 cranes in the city, and we thought that was a lot. Today, there are 30. A crane represents a large construction. That's what that means. So we have 30 cranes going on in the city. Probably the largest construction project now is called Center City, which is located between 9th Street and 11th Street and North New York Avenue and 8th Street. It's going to be a huge development project, probably $1 billion project. They're going to have about 200 apartments, 100 and some condominiums, several restaurants. I forgot how much square footage of commercial. It's going to be a huge project. We're very excited about that because we think it's going to bring in a lot of jobs and economic development. And then there are other developments going on around the city. In fact, Center City had to get 200 permits for that construction. So to put that in perspective, there's a lot going on there, and it's going to be a lot of inspections. Now, with inspections, something else that's misunderstood about the agency is that we don't do all inspections. I mean, we issued 40,000 building permits, and there's no way DCRA could inspect all those projects because we only have about 35 inspectors, half of which are commercial. So if you're doing construction, or if you're doing brand new construction, or you're renovating, or doing alteration repairs, then we have about 15 commercial inspections. And you can call us and we'll do the inspection for free. We have about 15 housing inspectors. So if you live in an apartment or if you live in a rental house, you call us if you want an inspection. Or if the landlord is getting a business permit, then they must get it inspected before they get the business permit to rent. So we'll go out and do the inspection. We do those inspections for free. Now, because of the volume of inspections, most jurisdictions allow for what's called third-party inspectors. So if you do commercial, if you need a commercial inspection, you're able to hire a third-party inspector. And those inspection companies are certified and registered with the DCRA. It's just like a tax preparer. You go to H&R Block, you can actually go to IRS, if you have a basic return. They'll prepare your return for you, but they're not equipped to prepare everybody's return. So they allow tax preparers to prepare returns, sign them, and the IRS accepts that. So same with third-party inspectors, you have to pay for a third-party inspector. If it's a DCRA inspector, it's free. If it's a third party, you pay for it. Now the luxury of a third-party inspector is that if you're doing a huge project like Center City, which is going to be several 100,000 square footage of construction, you can't wait for DCRA to come out and inspect it because we don't have the manpower. It might take us a couple of months to do an inspection that large. So you hire the third-party inspection company, and they can come out right away. For example, if you needed a housing inspection, when I first started, it was taking us about 3 weeks to get a housing inspector out. Right now it takes us about a day or two. It's an emergency, we send somebody out right away. But it might take 2 days now. Well, if you're a landlord, you need to get a business license right away. You might not be able to wait for that. Or if you're a commercial establishment, you need that inspection right away because you're doing the construction phases, so you can't go to the next phase until the first phase is inspected. So third-party companies, they're ready, willing, and able to come out right away. They might come out the same day that you call. DCRA is no way we can do that. So it's important to know that there's a third-party inspection process, and then DCRA has its own inspectors. The third-party inspectors you're not liable for their inspection. I mean, that's the other misnomer. People think, well, if a third-party inspector did it and they missed something, then DCRA is liable. And to put that in perspective, during the boom probably began, I guess the boom began in 2005, 6, or before that. The market was really hot. The property values were sky high. Everybody was renovating. Everybody was getting home equity loans to add additions and so forth. A lot of apartment building owners converted to condominiums. They did it quickly. Why? Because they wanted that quick money. So they got building permits. They got third-party inspectors to inspect. And in some cases, the work was shoddy. I mean, some of the work was shoddy. So we have several condominium establishments or condominium complexes where the roof is leaking, the pipes are leaking, the HVAC systems don't cool or heat sufficiently. And who do they blame? DCRA. Who did the inspections? Third-party companies. And they're saying, well, since they're registered with you, DCRA, you're responsible for the work. It doesn't work like that. If H&R Block does your tax return and there's a problem, you wouldn't blame the IRS. Hopefully you wouldn't blame the IRS. You blame the person that did your taxes. And it's hard to get that across to property owners because obviously they want somebody to fix the units, and the developer's gone. I mean, he's got the money, he sold the unit, the deed has been transferred to a new owner, he's out of there. He's not going to be responsible, he's not going to be even available. Now the law does require, in those cases, that the developer have a warranty bond, which is good for 2 years. So that bond says if something goes wrong, something major, structural, like the roof, HVAC system, all that, within 2 years, the bond will pay for the repairs. But sometimes in 2 years, in 2 years, nothing may go wrong. Maybe the third year, the roof starts leaking and the pipes start leaking and the HVAC system doesn't work. So unfortunately, or the person doesn't know. The condominium doesn't know that there's a bond out there, and they keep, talking to DCRA, and they may miss the deadline to apply for the bond. So that's where we are. Inspections, of course, is a big part of DCRA, and it's important to understand that. Now, with the basic business licenses, we have investigators. We have about 10 investigators who make sure businesses are licensed. So if you have a business, you may have an investigator come by to make sure you have a business license and that you're doing the business that the business license says you could do. So if you have a business license for a restaurant, then you shouldn't be doing dry cleaning, or you shouldn't be having a retail store. The other thing about the investigators and the basic business license is that beginning several months ago, you can now get 9 categories of licenses online. And we have a huge push for automation. We're trying to allow consumers and customers to get as much online as possible. You know, get the business license online, get your building permit online, and then we'll come out and we'll increase our enforcement to make sure people are honest. But most things are based on an honest system. I always use tax returns because, you know, tax returns are 100% based on honesty and the fact that people will do the right thing. And most people, probably 99% of people, do the right thing. There's a small percentage of people who want to cheat the system, beat the system. And sometimes they get caught, sometimes they don't get caught. But when they get caught, there's a big penalty to pay. And you probably know that over the years, the IRS now, everybody can file a return electronically in the confines of your home, or if you go to a preparer in the confines of your office building. So we're trying to push everything online. Right now, you can apply, pay for, and print business licenses in 9 categories online. Now we have 150 categories, so you know that even though the 9 represents a lot of the kinds of licenses, the most important licenses, we're trying to get all of them. And pretty soon we'll have that. In fact, our information technology director just walked in, Gus Rateria. He's our but basically, let's say you need $100,000 to start your business, but you don't have $100,000. So what you can do is incorporate, and within the corporation, establish shares of stock. So let's say you need 100,000, so you do 1,000 shares of stock, and you sell them to raise the $100,000. So now you have shareholders who own part of your corporation. But the corporation is also separate from you. So let's say you have a restaurant, somebody gets sick and they sue you. And they go to court and they get $1 million judgment. Well, the corporation has to pay that judgment. And they can't, if you're the president of the corporation, they can't go after your personal assets. So let's say you have a house, a car, a bank account, and you get sued in your corporation. They can only get whatever the corporation has. They can't get your personal assets. So that's very important to people who want to be shielded from liability. But you still have to have a business license. So let's say you're a restaurant and you're incorporated. You still have to get the business license for the restaurant, and then you have to do your corporate papers. You have to file your corporate papers. Now, a corporation can be a little complicated. So several years ago, the council established a new form of corporation called limited liability company. It's not as complicated as a corporation, but you're shielded from liability. So let's go back to the restaurant. You have a restaurant, and it's not in your personal name. It's in the limited liability company's name. So if you're sued, they can only get what the limited liability company has. They can't get your personal assets. And most businesses want to be shielded from that possibility because, something can happen. People might sue you. Now, the other thing is you can get insurance. You get an insurance policy to take care of that. So I was saying how the corporation is an entity, a limited liability company is a spin-off of a corporation. Because most people just want the shielded liability. They don't want to be personally liable. So they had to do the corporation, which is more complicated. So the government came up with a limited liability company concept. It gives you the same protection as a corporation, but not all the complicated paperwork. But you still, that's just your form of entity. You still have to get the business license, which is separate and apart. You have to get a business license no matter what, whether you're a corporation, a limited liability company, or if you're just working independently, you're considered a sole proprietorship, but you still have to get that business license. And that's the beauty of the Small Business Research Center, because you can sit down with an attorney who can help you figure out what's the best form business that I want to do.
I don't know if Gabriela and perdón tu nombre? Tatiana. I don't know if Gabriela and Tatiana want to pose your suggestion, your question.
Yeah, when it comes to getting licenses, permits, and all that, most people would like to see more options online. Sorry, that's work for you, but the more the process can be put online, would we reduce the amount of time the person has to show up in person. That would be greatly appreciated, and I know the agency is moving that way. I don't know if you've thought about maybe creating forms or improving the way the forms are once they're online through TED. You've heard of the TED Talks, and maybe Gus is already familiar with that, so that may be something to look into. And another idea is, most people say it can be streamlined process. Tatiana, she said she spent a lot of time getting a permit for a sign, getting a permit for construction, all these. There are a lot of different steps, and people, I know that things have streamlined, but how to improve that a little bit more. And this may be a trip opportunity for some of you. Singapore may be a case study, maybe you've already looked at it, where they are ultra efficient. It's probably #1 in efficiency in a lot of different ways in the world. That may be a case study or something to look into. Another thing that we find that we try to do when we provide technology.
You mean in taxes?
In taxes.
Okay.
First of all, has it been moved from what it was? Because people complain. Understood is DCRA sent an inspector out and said, yes, it's abandoned and vacant. And has the tax rate been changed?
Okay, let me say this. Because the vacant property tax rate has had some unintended consequences. Now, we're very liberal. I mean, you come in and say, like Dover, we've met with them, we work with them, they come in and say, well, look, we bought the property, we're struggling, we got financing, we want to rebuild, and all that kind of stuff. And we gave them exemptions. And about a month or so ago, we got a complaint from sort of civic activists in that area. They said, hey, why are you giving them tax breaks? They're not doing anything with the property, it's just sitting there. You should be taxing them at the highest rate. So then the person went to a council member and said, why is this happening? This is outrageous. Why is DCRA giving these tax rates to this property and they're not doing anything with it? And the council member said, you're right, Mr. Majett, why are you doing that? So guess what? We took away the money. So the short answer is they will be taxed at the highest rate.
Which is 34,000, I guess, isn't it?
Well, it's probably more than that. Probably more than 34,000. But the point is, I mean,
What is it, $10 of 1,000?
if it's vacant and not blighted, it's $500 per. It's $5 per $100 of assessed value. So let's just say on a $1 million property, that $5 would be
50,000.
50,000. If it's blighted and vacant, it's $10 per $100. So on $1 million, it will be 100,000.
So if the property is $3.4 million, so that means it's $320,000 in tax.
Thanks to an unknown city council member and an unnamed.
Nobody's recording here, are they?
Well, it's actually public because it's emails. I mean, it was a flurry of emails, so it's all public record. Somebody forwarded it. But because of, and that's what happens. That's one of the hardest parts of my job. I get a situation like Doville where you want to help. You say, okay, well, look, sure, this is a classic case where somebody should get an exemption. And then you have people complaining, well, Mr. Majett, why are you giving them exemptions? This property is vacant, and you should tax it at the highest rate possible. So you have diametrically opposed people, and you have to do what you have to follow the law. And the law says, I mean, we're giving them breaks, and now might be time. Now, but for the complaints, they would not be taxed at the highest rate.